please welcome Chairman Marcellus Osceola Jr. of the Seminole Tribe of Florida and Chairman Talbert Cypress of the Miccosukee Tribe.
It's an honor to be here today. Ponyata that yale kahya let achieve in yoli chikta. Now the more ya aponi chachka nakchuba aponi chmachte. Mine hamade achieve by the ma aponi chikta ya young no so kahya let hachachiam money. Mine humia to start much the mahachik. It's an honor to be here, side by side with the chairman. We're here to talk about the environment and our responsibility to conserve the environment. And that's reflected in our communal values and enshrined in our constitutions.
Good evening, everyone. Marcellus Osceola Jr., Seminole Tribe Chairman, and it's an honor to be here in front of you today. And as we talk about the risk of what the climate changes are coming to us in the future. We are the original stewards of the land. We've been here before the Mayflower crashed into the rock up there. We broke bread, right? So everybody understands that since that time, the first tree was cut down for a fire to build houses and to move forward to a more pleasant and convenient life that we live from those days to today. It wasn't long ago that our ancestors lived in the Everglades. My father, being one of them, who lived on the Everglades, in a chickee, which is a man-made house, so that we could live in off the ground, away from the animals and alligators in the Everglades to survive, because that's where we were pushed to survive. Now, there were only 300 of us left at the time that the wars were over, and our tribe has never still signed a peace treaty. We are still the unconquered Seminoles, and we are proud of that. But what came of it? Thank you. But what came with that was a lot of responsibility to share our knowledge with others. And our brother here and our sister tribe down in Miccosukee off of Highway 41 shares that same unconquered spirit with us. As they are the same tribe, the same people, we share the same values, traditions, culture, and language with each other. And we value the land a lot more than a lot of other people do around us. The Everglades is precious. And why it's precious is because it's a natural filter for whatever comes from the north, whatever comes from the east and the west, and what filters down through to us down here in Miami area, the Hollywood-Broward area where we all live. It's important to us that people that live in those northern areas, and when the rain falls, that they do not pollute that water before it gets to the Everglades, because it's more of a strain on the Everglades. And I know it becomes harder as the years go by because of the amount of people who are moving to the state of Florida, and the people who are moving anywhere in the country, right? Because this is a strain on every part of the country. The natural resources are being burned up, and that's something we have to understand. I myself am looking into buying my first electric car. Yes. But those are the challenges that we all face, right? Making that move to actually dedicate yourself to being part of that change. Not talking about it, not carrying a banner, not protesting, but actually being part of that change and committing to that change. And that's what we believe, as our tribes have combined to try to do some alternative energy projects that will help take us off some of the grid, start implementing some electric cars into our projects and into our facilities. So that way we can try to take ourselves off the grid and help be true stewards of the land again.
Now there's this urgency to address these issues that affect not just Native and Indigenous people, but all of us. And the only way forward is through collaborative efforts, and the Miccosukee Tribe and Seminole Tribe are here to help these discussions and to find solutions to these problems. May we be mindful and intentional of the world we leave for future generations.
Shinabish.
Thank you.
And now, from Deloitte, John Mennel with Matt Rosoff from CNBC.
Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks, John, for joining me.
Thank you.
So CNBC is in the business of covering dollars and cents, the bottom line. And I want to start with a very basic question. Why should businesses today care about sustainability, care about climate change? How does that affect the dollars and cents and the core of the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll start not dollars and cents, but then I'll get there really quickly. Most large companies today are serious about climate change, are taking serious steps. And there are two reasons. One is that the extent of climate change is really obvious. Everybody sees it. Deloitte does an annual CEO survey, and 86% of CEOs say that they have personally experienced the effects of climate change and extreme weather. And when you get to that kind of tipping point, it's something that's not theoretical, it's visceral, and people take action on it.
And when did that tipping point happen?
So I can't answer from the data, but anecdotally, it's happened in the past couple of years. And I think that we have acceleration of extreme weather events. We've heard a lot about that at this conference. And I think people are seeing that, and that's causing them to take action. And it's people in companies, it's their investors, it's the regulators, it's their customers, it's their employees. They're all seeing this. The other reason to get to dollars and cents is that taking action against climate change is generally good for business. When we put a strategy together for a company, all the projects and all the investments they need to make to get to net zero, 50 to 70% of that generally saves or makes them money. And there are things that they should do even if they didn't care about the environment.
So on the saving money side, that makes sense when you're talking about cutting expenses on energy and that kind of thing.
When you take out carbon, you're taking out waste, you're generally taking out cost.
What about on the making money side? How does sustainability help there?
Yeah, so a lot of the biggest, so the energy transition and the net zero transition is the biggest thing that's going to happen to the economy since the Industrial Revolution. The biggest businesses of 20, 30 years from now are being created today on energy transition. And so those are both, new products, they're completely new businesses, and we're seeing that really across the board in all segments, all industries.
Do you see that consumers care as well, and do you have any sort of specific areas or cases that you could talk about where that's happened?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There is good data that consumers care about sustainability and will pay more for sustainable products. There's a very good NYU Stern strategy or study that has pretty good data. Deloitte did a study with the Grocery Manufacturers Association that looks at food products in particular and finds that most people are buying on something other than taste, price, and convenience. They're buying on a number of other things that often include sustainability. And there are products that are getting premiums because they're more sustainable. And I look at a lot in apparel, the Ralph Lauren green polo, the new circular Nike Air, all great products that are getting a premium for being green. I will say though that expecting consumers to pay more for your product because it's more sustainable is not a good strategy. And so we generally see companies thinking about how the value of their product in a couple of different ways. One is lower cost that we talked about, lower life cycle cost. The other is that just producing better products. We're working with a protein manufacturer, a meat manufacturer that's producing lower carbon proteins through regenerative ag practices. They just taste better, right? The consumers are very clear that they're better, tastier products, and that's why they're going to buy them. And then the third strategy that companies are using is, carbon has value, carbon is an asset, and to find who values that and have them pay for that. And that may be the B2B customer in that situation.
So if you're a business and you're interested in improving your sustainability, addressing climate change, and proving it to investors, customers, and so forth, what are the things that you have to figure out how to measure? Like, what are the factors that go into that, and what do you have to look at? Yeah,
so the biggest thing, data is a problem across the board, and I can talk about kind of what's hardest, but over 70% of large companies have a sustainability goal, have a published net zero goal that they've committed to the public that they're going to make. We did a survey of financial institutions, which I think applies to all companies. It says that only 5% of those companies say that they have the data to be confident that their footprints are accurate and that they're able to meet those plans.
Okay.
And so data is a big problem across the board, and there's a lot of innovation in how to get better.
Right, because you have to measure not only your own emissions accurately, you also have to measure the scope 3, which is the emissions of all of your suppliers and everybody that's sort of feeding into your product, right?
Exactly, yeah. So the data has to be more accurate than it is now, and so it has to be kind of down to the level of a specific product, a specific factory, a specific machine in that factory. The data has to be much timelier, that a lot of companies are doing annual reports, which if you think about it, when that report is out, it's already a year old, and you can't manage with that kind of backward-looking data. And then it has to be transparent, so you have to be able to get data, like you said, from your suppliers, your customers, and pull all of that in. And it's really that, I liked what Tom Steyer said, that we've kind of won the argument, and most large organizations, most people, agree that climate change is happening and that it's an urgent issue for us to address. And right now it's really the how. So how do we get there?
Yeah, so if you do have this, the 2030 or the 2050 plan, and you have some idea of what needs to be measured, what technologies and what solutions are there that are making this measurement better, easier, more accurate, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so there are a lot of really interesting technologies out there. It's what I spend a lot of my time doing. Deloitte does have a product we're announcing today, actually, called Greenlight, that helps companies set their targets, calculate what their emissions are on an accurate basis, put together the series of investments that they'll need to reach that goal, and then really importantly to optimize those plans, because for most large organizations, there's no one way to get to net zero. There are multiple ways, and the technologies and the costs are changing all the time, and so that ability to optimize is really important.
So what are some of the technologies that are actually used in measurement, and how has that evolved, and how do you think it's going to evolve over the next 10 years? As opposed, we understand how software works, but what are the actual measurement techniques and how do they work?
So Internet of Things and what you can do with sensors has really, really evolved. We're seeing, and the technology to pull measurements off those sensors. So we're seeing companies put sensors in every building, every room, do sub-metering, understand how to adjust thermostats so that they're not cooling or heating a building when no one's there. It doesn't need to be, or they're not overheating and cooling. They're measuring downtime on machines. If machines are old and they're using too much electricity, they're looking at that. There are really interesting applications of blockchain to be able to measure all of the steps up your supply chain through 6 or 7 levels, and what happens at the mine, and how that turns into metal, and how that turns into a car. Like all of that can be tracked pretty precisely now.
With the scope 3 emissions, if a company is tracking their suppliers, how can they be sure that the suppliers are providing accurate data? And is there a way that you can check that, or that you can help them check that?
Yeah, so a couple of different ways. A lot of the applications of blockchain are to make sure that once a supplier reports what they're doing, that they can't change that. And if they report it to one person, that they're reporting the same to one company, that they're reporting the same thing to other companies. We're also seeing a lot of supplier marketplaces, so suppliers are making that data public, or at least public to all of their customers, so you're getting kind of a single source of truth on the data. And so there's a lot of evolution in how that's happening. It's still a hard area, to be honest, but and one that companies are grappling with, but there's a huge amount of improvement in how that's tracked.
I sort of look at what has happened in the carbon credit market.
Yep.
And, to some degree, there can be a little bit of a wink. We'll say that this is working, when in actuality, if you dig down into it, the trees that are planted burn down later. There's all kinds of fudging. So, how rigorous can these measurements be, and is it dependent on more stringent regulation? How much action do you think that companies are willing to take to really make sure that this information they're getting is accurate?
Yeah, it's a good question. Companies care about reporting actual data and accurate data for reputational reasons. Their customers care about it, their investors care about it, their employees care about it, and often when we're helping companies with business cases, the entire business case can be made just on the employee angle. A company that's doing the right things on sustainability has an easier time hiring people, retaining them, getting them to work hard and be engaged. And so for all those reasons, regulation is definitely going to help. And there's SEC regulation that's going to come out later this year. There's European regulation that virtually all large US companies need to comply with because it's extraterritorial. And what that's done is created an environment in which the CFO is going to have to sign off on their disclosures about carbon. It's going to have to be as accurate, as auditable as the financial data. And you'll potentially see stakeholder or shareholder lawsuits if the data is not correct.
So it becomes a new gap, basically.
Yeah, and it just changes the level of seriousness with which companies, and the level of rigor that companies apply to that data.
So when you're actually talking to companies and a company wants to increase its sustainability, help the climate, what are the areas that are the ripest for improvement, and what technologies are you particularly excited about, bullish about, that they can actually deploy to get there?
Yeah, I mean,
opposed to just measuring.
Yeah, one of the things that's most exciting, and I think that most people in this room probably know about it, is I mentioned at the beginning that 50 to 70% of what a company needs to do to get to net zero generally saves money. A lot of that's been because of the amazing improvements in renewables, both in the availability of renewables and in the cost profile for renewables over the past 10 years or so. Solar power is dropping at about, the cost is dropping at about 10% a year, and I'm sorry, wind is dropping at about 10% a year, solar power is dropping at 18 to 20% a year for PV. And so we're in a situation where in most cases, for a large company to do a long-term renewables contract, it saves them money, it cash flows positive over time. So that's something that really every company should be doing. And then the other area that's improved a lot is both the availability and the cost of electric vehicles and what's available for corporate fleets with electric vehicles.
Anything on in terms of building improvement and that kind of stuff, heating and cooling? I know there's a lot of waste there as well.
Yep. So building efficiency as well. A lot of the difference is in what I mentioned with sensors, that you can understand on a lot more accurate basis where you're expending your heating and cooling and electricity cost to a level that companies couldn't understand even a couple of years ago. And there are both technologies and there are service providers that will help you manage the electricity that goes in your buildings, help you retrofit your buildings. And a lot of times we're seeing clients save 20 to 30% of their energy costs, which is money that just drops to the bottom line.
When you look at the overall space, what are the biggest barriers? What are the thorniest problems? And one thing I think of is with renewables, there have to be more renewables on the grid and there are structural issues there. But when you look at the overall space, what are the things that are standing in the way or the stuff that's going to be hard to solve?
Yeah, so we're also doing a lot of work with clients. We have a product called Green Space that helps look at what's 10 to 20 years out and what's coming. And the things that are not here yet but will be soon are solutions for long-haul transit for large trucks, maritime transit, which I think we're going to hear a little bit about later, sustainable aviation fuels, which you've heard about the other day, and then manufacturing processes. So there's been a lot of really positive development in things like green steel. You're going to see a Volvo in the next couple of years that's produced entirely with net zero steel, and green cement and some of those other kind of foundational materials are still really interesting progress still to come.
We are almost out of time, so I want to close with one final question. Are you generally optimistic that most companies will make the goals that they've set for 2030 and 2050?
I'm generally optimistic just because, like I said, I've seen so much improvement, even such a change in tone, and then so much of an improvement in the underlying technology just in the past really 2 years, right? So a very short period of time, that I am optimistic that most companies will make their goals. What I'm less optimistic about is are we doing enough overall? And we talked about large companies, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000. There's still a lot of smaller companies, a lot of governments, a lot of individuals, a lot of changes that need to be made beyond that footprint for us to get to where we need to go.
I do believe we're out of time. Thank you very much,
Great,
John.
thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Brian Huseman, Vice President, Public Policy with Amazon, and Ingrid Irigoyen with the Aspen Institute.
All right, let's talk about ships. I'm Ingrid Irigoyen. I lead our ocean and climate work at the Aspen Institute's Energy and Environment Program. And thank you, friends. I spend most of my time right now worrying about large ocean-going ships and how we can make them zero emission in the future. So why do ships matter? Every piece of clothing that you're wearing, almost every item in your home, the healthcare products that keep you healthy, and the food on your plate, almost all of it is transported on massive ocean-going vessels. And I do mean huge. Imagine a vessel that has a main engine that is the height of this auditorium. Those ships are powered by stuff called heavy fuel oil, and it is essentially the cheap sludge at the bottom of a barrel of oil. And it's why shipping as a sector emits about the same volume of greenhouse gases as a large industrialized nation. The challenge is how to stimulate a transition in this sector to new, scalable, zero-emission maritime fuels and technologies, which are not yet available in the marketplace today, but technically could be. So at the Aspen Institute, we asked ourselves, how can we help climate-leading freight buyers, those companies that are the customers of the shipping industry, to collaborate, to bolster the business case so that that shipping value chain can make big investments? And how can we get them to do this now so that shipping becomes not only clean, but so that it continues to be affordable and reliable, which is what our society needs? Fortunately, we found leaders, companies who are eager to work with their peers, to use their voice and their buying power to drive this transition forward. Speaking of such companies, I'm excited to be here today with Brian Huseman, who's the Vice President of Public Policy for Amazon, a company that has been one of our earliest and most ambitious champions for this work. So I'll turn it over to Brian to say a few words about how Amazon is taking climate action overall, and then he'll share some good news about our work together in ocean shipping. Brian.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. I'm Brian Huseman, Vice President of Public Policy at Amazon, and I'd like to start by thanking the Aspen Institute and the City of Miami Beach for convening this important event. At Amazon, we are committed to bold climate action. We've pledged to reach net zero carbon emissions across our operations by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. And as part of our efforts to decarbonize our business, we've already reached 85% renewable energy. We're on a path to 100% renewable by 2025. And for the past 2 years, we've been the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy. And we know at Amazon that we can't achieve these ambitious climate goals alone. So in 2019, we launched the Climate Pledge, inviting other companies to join us. And the Climate Pledge now has more than 400 companies and organizations that represent 55 industries and 35 countries. So collectively, we are coming at the climate crisis from nearly every sector and angle.
And one area of focus has been on those hard-to-abate sectors, like maritime shipping. And removing the climate impact of those sectors requires continuous collaboration and innovation. We believe that as a corporation, we have a strong role in creating a demand signal for zero carbon services and fuels. And for that to be successful, there has to be enough demand to make it an investment that can be scaled economically. That's why we need governments to set policies that enable the transition and for many more companies to join us. 2 years ago, we worked with the Biden administration to launch the First Movers Coalition. In that, we announced our commitment to use ships and zero-emission fuels for at least 10% of the volume of our goods shipped internationally by 2030 and 100% of the volume shipped by 2040. We also worked with Aspen to co-found the Cargo Owners for Zero Emissions Vessels, or COZEV, bringing together cargo owners to help achieve those goals. And there's 19 members now in COZEV. So we made a lot of great progress, and we're going to do more this year. But today, I am very excited to announce the launch of the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance. We call it ZIMBA, to expedite the delivery of zero-emission ocean services. And this is with our co-founders at Patagonia, Chibo, and of course, the Aspen Institute. So through this alliance, thank you. We're very excited about this, and through this alliance, we're taking a major step to reduce maritime emissions and enable economies of scale. We think we're going to kickstart the clean energy transition in an essential industry that supports 90% of all global trade and services millions of communities around the world. So ZIMBA, the Zero Emissions Maritime Buyers Alliance, plans to issue its initial tender later this year, and delivery of these services will be expected to start in 2025. So to all the freight buyers here today, we invite you to join ZIMBA as a way to access zero-emission shipping. And to the shipping lines in partnership with the fuel suppliers, we encourage you to work with ZIMBA to innovate and help shape the future of the maritime shipping industry by offering these zero-emission services. And finally, to our government partners, we cannot solve these challenges alone. So we encourage you to adopt complementary policy action that supports the scaling and economic viability of these solutions, so that they can become the new normal. So on behalf of everyone at Amazon, again, thank Aspen and Miami Beach for this amazing event. Thank you all, and we're excited to see what comes next.
Please welcome from Bank of America, Paul D'Onofrio with Judith Rodin.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Paul, we're very excited to have this conversation.
Great to be here.
Really, congratulations on Bank of America's commitment, $1.5 trillion towards sustainable finance, which is pretty incredible. And we know that about 2/3 of it is going to the environmental transition. So for me, that means that where others see challenges, you see opportunities, which is amazing. So elaborate on that perspective. Tell us what you're doing, where you see the greatest potential for impact, and how you're facilitating that.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. So yes, a little bit of background. Bank of America is committed to mobilize $1.5 trillion towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, with $1 trillion of that devoted to the environment. So the question is, how are we going to get there? How, how confident we are? And the answer is, we're pretty confident. In fact, we think we can probably exceed that goal by 2030. And the reason we're so confident is because while many people think of the race to net zero as a huge challenge, and it is, it's a complex challenge, we also think of it as a huge opportunity. Many of you know this, but just about everything we produce, use, and do every day puts greenhouse gases into the environment. Just the attempt by all those who have committed so far, with more companies committing every single day, to get to net zero in less than 28 years, is going to have more impact on the world economy than the Industrial Revolution. It's a huge challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity. Companies that do this well across all industries, not just high-emitting industries, But across all industries, companies who do this well are going to see their market share grow. The largest companies in the world have all committed, 100 of the largest banks, 140 of the largest countries. And by the way, the world's smaller and mid-sized companies, many of them are committed as well, but the ones who haven't, they're all in the supply chain, which is a fancy way of saying they sell their products to companies who have committed. So they're covered by a commitment as well. In fact, 90% of the world's greenhouse gases right now are covered by some sort of commitment. So again, just the attempt by everybody who's committed is going to transform the world economy. If you listen to experts, they'll tell you we need twice the amount of annual investment, at least twice the amount of annual investment to get to net zero. McKinsey says that number should be about 275 trillion. Just think about all of the innovation, all of the jobs, all the social economic development, including in the global south, that's going to surround an investment of 275 trillion. So we've got to get to net zero for our children, but it's also the best opportunity for the world to grow responsibly. But who's going to come up with 275 trillion? Much of it has to be front-loaded in this decade. Governments have to play their part, but their budgets are pretty strapped, and frankly, they don't have 275 trillion. It's going to come from the private sector via banks and via the capital markets. And it's already happening. That should make us feel good. It's already happening. If you take a Bank of America, for example, we have the $1.5 trillion commitment. We've already mobilized 410 billion towards that commitment, with 250 billion of it focused on the environment. We have our own transition plan. So we've raised $14 billion through sustainable linked bonds. More important than that, we've financed 16% of the wind and solar in the United States. And even more important than that, companies have transition plans. And so we've raised or helped to raise over 500 billion via 700 bonds that are linked to metrics, specific metrics around sustainability. Now, you know, sustainability bonds, they kind of get all the attention because they're public. But companies use all our products to get to net zero. They use loans, they use bonds, they use equity offerings, they use treasury services, they use derivatives, they use M&A, they use sales and trading, they use all our products to get to net zero. So when you see a bond, a sustainable linked bond that's being issued by a company, that is just the tip of the iceberg on activity that's already out there as companies transition to net zero. And companies, big and small, across all sectors, not just the high emitters, they are transitioning not only because they see risks, but also because they see a huge opportunity surrounding net zero. The opportunity to take market share from maybe a company that doesn't have as good of a transition plan or no transition plan. Remember, every company is virtually in the supply chain, or they sell to another company, and every single day more and more companies are committed. Maybe it's the opportunity to get some of the 275 trillion of investment. One company's investment is another company's revenue. So we are confident we can get to our $1 trillion goal. In fact, as I said, I think we're going to exceed it by the end of the decade. And I think we all should be confident that the world can get to net zero because the incentives are out there for the private sector. We as a large bank, we see the activity of our clients. And because net zero is, you know, it's not just a big complex challenge, it's also the biggest and best opportunity for the world to grow responsibly.
Thank you. I think it's so important for people to understand that there's such a broad array of financial instruments that you have at your disposal in order to make this happen, in order to enable companies
and it
to
doesn't
reach
have to be
their
anything
goals.
new. It's our existing products they're using.
It's great. Really fantastic. Addressing climate change, we all know, we've been discussing it for the past 2 days, involves so many different stakeholders. We talked just a moment ago about the private sector, but each of these stakeholder groups have different roles, and all of them make a joint commitment to get to a low carbon economy. So from your vantage point, how does the public sector and the private sector work together? How do they work together in order to advance these goals, in order to get to our low carbon economy? what are these public-private partnerships really doing, in your view, and what must they do?
Okay. Well, first of all, I mean, we have a perspective that the world is not going to get to net zero without the private sector. But we also believe we can't do it by ourselves. So governments, nonprofits, individuals, private sector, they all have a role to play, and they all have to work together. That's why we're a member of lots of global coalitions, the International Business Council, Breakthrough Energy Coalition, First Movers, and my favorite is the SMI, which is Sustainable Market Initiative, which our CEO, Brian Moynihan, co-heads. That's a group of 200 executives that come together often to talk about the projects they're working on to accelerate the transition. A group of those leaders met with the G7 in their last meeting, and they met with the G20, and that's the first time a group of private sector leaders have met in those forums. So coordination is happening. We're not asking for money in the private sector. We have the money to do this. But there are things that we can coordinate on together, and I think are coordinating in order to speed the transition. So I just want to list a few of them. The first one is we need to develop better and more trusted carbon markets, including a price of carbon, so that everybody who's making an investment decision on a project knows what the true cost of carbon is. The second one is we need to create demand signals for green energy that's going to fuel the transition. Those demand signals are going to stimulate the development of supply. So companies, governments, they need to put in orders for green energies years out into the future, so that people who are creating that energy have the confidence to invest, and they can get the financing to do it. The third one is we got to continue to incentivize investment in early stage technologies and in the scaling of early stage technologies like green hydrogen, carbon capture, nuclear fusion, many others. I would say the third one is that we need to reform the multilateral development banks and other financial institutions so that their activities encourage the private sector to come in and help finance the transition in the global south. And then the last one that I think is very important is that the public and private sector need to work on the right disclosures. So right now, we have a lot of voluntary disclosures out there. I'll spend a minute on this one. We have a lot of voluntary disclosures out there. It's sort of become an alphabet soup of disclosures that are, inconsistent and overlapping. And we need disclosures that are uniform across the globe, transparent, objective, and most important, trusted. And to be trusted, disclosures have to be something that can be measured, and they have to be material. And if we can get disclosures that are, uniform across the globe, objective and transparent and trusted, then market participants will be able to compare the activities of corporations and other entities across the globe, and capital will flow to its best and highest use, and we can speed the transition along. Plus companies, by the way, they can spend their time on actually reducing their emissions instead of reporting under 4 or 5 different or 7 or 8 frameworks that, have the potential to confuse investors. So Bank of America, other large companies, we got together with the 3 large accounting firms, and we came up with something called this, now I can't remember the name, but what did I? The stakeholder capital metrics, thank you. We worked with the 3 large accounting firms. It was based upon the voluntary, framework that's out there. And 200 companies have signed on. We've been reporting for 3 years. 150 other companies have been reporting. And oh, by the way, that's just one way to do it. We'd love it if everybody got on board with that, but we just want we'll sign up for anything. One uniform standard across the globe, transparent, objective, and has to be trusted.
Let's go back to emerging markets for a moment, because many people are skeptical about the kinds of capital flows that you've described going to the global south, to emerging market economies. How do you see it?
Well, look, the global south is incredibly important to a just transition. And But you have to remember that the large global banks, we don't today operate in many of the countries in the global south. We don't understand the risks, the opportunities. We don't deliver credit or monitor loans there. We don't have people on the ground. More daunting than that, the laws, rules, and regulations in the countries we operate on, they don't allow us to use your deposits for investments of that risk profile. Remember, it's not the bank's money, it's your money in the form of deposits, and that's a highly regulated. So look, there's solutions here. We are already working with some entities, but we need to combine, we need to work with entities like multilateral development banks that operate in those markets, that understand the risk, they can deliver the loans, they know the players. And we need to blended finance, we need to blend our capital and funding with their funding, because their funding is different. Their funding is from their shareholders, which are countries and taxpayers. Their funding can have a different return and certainly operates under a different regulatory framework. So again, it needs to be tweaked. They need to be tweaked a little bit so that private sector, it encourages private sector to come in, and we can get a lot more done a lot faster. We're doing it today. It just takes, it's a lot of work. If we industrialize this model, make some tweaks, we can do it a lot more and a lot faster.
Regrettably, we're out of time. Please join me in thanking Paul Ganassia.
Please welcome our next speakers to the stage.
Good evening, Miami Beach. My name is Alex Heckler, and I have a hard time saying no, which is how I ended up as the chair of this small nonprofit host committee tasked with raising millions of dollars and signing every contract for this event. Now we are in just year two, one of the premier climate summits in the world. On behalf of the host committee, I want to express my deepest gratitude. First, thank you for coming. Last night, Bill Nye made a great observation. Our climate challenges will not be fixed through individual actions. We need massive action on a global scale. So I'm grateful that you have traveled from all over the country or the world to participate in this great conversation this week. Second, and it's especially important because it's International Women's Day, I want to recognize the two women in my life who are most responsible for putting this great show on. Their tireless behind-the-scenes work made this happen. They're the unsung heroes of the event, Michelle Berger from the city of Miami Beach and Veronica Pizzorni from LSN Partners. Thank you both for your work. I also want to recognize Mike Llorente, John Adrabi, and others on the host committee who've worked for the last 2 years and hopefully many more years in the future in making this event a reality. Third, we want to thank Dan Porterfield and the Aspen Institute, their amazing team, for cultivating and curating an incredible program that made this event a reality. And then I want to thank the civic and political leaders who attended and the business leaders. So this could be a conversation that makes change happen now, that makes policy change now, because that is the time to start this program now. We're here tonight to see my friend Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States. And she answered the call to lead this conversation tonight. She didn't come here to give a speech for you. She came here to continue an ongoing conversation about our climate challenges. A few weeks ago, she was in St. Cloud, Minnesota at the New Flyer factory to look at electric buses. She then went to Arizona to talk about clean energy. Then she went to Munich, where she spoke at length about this climate crisis. Days later, she was with the National Space Council talking about climate. And yesterday, she was in Colorado talking about water storage and electric buses. That's what real leadership looks like. I am honored to be here with real climate leaders from all around the world, including our next speaker, who is a real climate leader, and he's the former Colombian president, President Duque. He will discuss the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Thank you all for coming again, and enjoy this evening's program.
Hello, everybody. How are we doing today? Beautiful audience. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with all of you. My name is Vanessa Ock. I am a journalist with Telemundo Network. And it is truly my pleasure to be here with former President of Colombia, el señor Duque. Iván Duque, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros, Presidente.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you all. It's a great honor for me to be in Aspen Climate Ideas and also in International Women's Day. My congratulations to all the women who are joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias. Bueno, pues we're going to talk about an issue that is so important not only for Colombia, but for the well-being of our whole planet, and this is the Amazon rainforest. The Amazon jungle is not only a source of food and water and medicine, but it's also key to maintaining the balance of our whole planet. It is key to clean energy, clean air, healthy water cycles, and is home to almost 10% of the biodiversity of the whole planet. The protection of the Amazon is very, very complex, and former President Iván Duque has a very unique perspective because Colombia is home to 10% of the Amazon jungle. I know you have been always very, very passionate about environmental issues. So first of all, I would like you to explain us a bit why the Amazon jungle is so important, not only for Colombia and the region, but for all of us, for the whole planet.
Well, thank you so much, Vanessa. First of all, I would like to say that the Amazon is part of the most important and strategic biomes in the world. Maybe when we look at the Congo Basin and the Indonesian jungle, we're talking about 3 hotspots that are crucial for the world to be able to absorb carbon dioxide. So if we lose the Amazon, we will be very much in a major environmental disaster without any way back. And what's hurting is that in the last 4 decades, we have lost the equivalent of France and Germany together, or California and Texas together, when it comes to the Amazon due to deforestation. So we have to act, and this is not just a matter of the countries doing the work. I think the whole world needs to look at this kind of interventions as something strategical. And I have to say something. If the pattern of deforestation that the Amazon currently has continues, the Amazon will not be a container of carbon dioxide, but will be a net emitter in less than a decade. So we must act now.
And actually what you're saying is, it's very worrisome because there are some areas of the Amazon jungle that are already emitting more carbon than absorbing. Yesterday, a new report came out that projects that if Colombia keeps going the way that is going, in the next 2 decades, the country could lose at least 2.1 million hectares of forest. So that is the equivalent to the area of the country of El Salvador. So is this preventable, President?
So I think the most important challenge, Vanessa, and that's the challenge that we tried to face when I was in office, is that this trend has been occurring year over year over year in the last 40 years. And the first thing we acknowledged is that people don't see environmental crimes in the way they should. And when we looked deeply, we found out that most of the environmental crimes in Colombia did not have an imprisonment sentence. And when you're destroying the environment, you're basically also creating a crime against humanity.
Yes.
So we changed that criminal code in order to include imprisonment. We decided to include the protection of biodiversity as one of the cornerstones of the national security agenda, But we also committed ourselves to the campaign that was launched by Mark Benioff with the World Economic Forum in 2019 called 1 Trillion Trees. And we were able to plant 180 million trees within 3 years. And we put an end to the trend of increasing deforestation. We were able to reduce by 29%, considering that we had a pandemic on the trend, which was important, but we still have pretty much a long way to go. And the question is, how can we do it? And that's something that I've been working right now in a concept that I call market-driven, nature-based solutions, so that we can put an end to illegal mining, illegal cattle, livestock exploitation, illegal expansion of the agricultural border, and illegal crops. And the only way to do it is by creating sustainable income to the people in those rural communities, changing their ways of living to become conservers and preservers of the Amazon forest. So we started with 10,000 families. We launched the Leticia Pact with other 8 countries. But I think we are at the moment, if we are able to bring the resources from the international community on a market-driven basis to protect what is the most important biodiversity hotspot in the world. And if you allow me to share also this with the audience, when we look at the amount of water, fresh water, that the Amazon River discharges in 1 hour is the equivalent of all the fresh water that is consumed in a year by 8 billion people around the world.
And what you're proposing is a model that has been successful in Costa Rica. No? The government actually supports people for them to understand that it is more profitable to protect the forest than to cut it.
Yeah, but let me also make some comments about the things that worry. When I see yellow machinery that weighs tons in the middle of nowhere in the Amazon, the question is how they got there. Who installed them? And they're destroying. So I'm trying to also call the producers of yellow machinery around the world to use AI technologies and identify with AI the machinery that is being put on environmental hotspots, and to try to use technology in order not to make it operable.
Yeah.
And that is something that, this is a discussion about ideas. Wonderful. I think we should. Thank you. And the other question that I want to raise is about illegal crops. People don't regularly know that in order to produce 1 hectare of coca, 3 hectares of tropical jungle are destroyed. People don't regularly know that to produce a kilo of cocaine, 12 gallons of gasoline have been used, and almost 2 pounds of cement. And that's basically what people are consuming. But all the chemicals are also diverted into the Amazon jungle or other jungles in Latin America. So if we're able to debrand cocaine in such a way that we also understand that this kind of drugs are also ecocidal, yes, I think we will have a different approach. And last but not least, which is also a discussion about ideas, is we have to demonstrate to the communities that they can have a better income by conserving and protecting that by getting into illegal cattle, illegal wood production, or illegal expansion of the agricultural border. And that's where biodiversity credits can be a possibility if we have better accounting, more transparency, more traceability, but we combine the work of indigenous communities with the protection of hotspots in Latin America. So that's also a debate about ideas in which I'm involved right now.
Wonderful, wonderful, President. So, deforestation is a huge problem, and it is very, very, very complex to tackle. During your time as president from 2018 to 2022, Colombia lost more than 700,000 hectares of forest due to deforestation. And according to the Ministry of the Environment, in 2021, you lost 174,000 hectares of the Amazon jungle. This is an area equivalent to the city of Bogota. Would you say, President, that you were successful tackling deforestation?
Well, that's the thing. My environmental minister is somewhere here in the audience, Carlos Correa, and we worked so hard. And the first challenge we had is how can we define success? Because you had a rate of deforestation that was very high. In 2017, before I took office, we lost 214,000 hectares. So our main challenge was to stop the trend and then start the curbing down. So we said, let's define success with something that is measurable and traceable, and we said we have to reduce the trend by at least 30%, which would be the largest reduction on the trend in historical terms. 2020, we had a major reduction. 2021, we had a little spike. In 2019, we had a major reduction. And overall, we were able to reduce the trend by 29%. Do I feel happy about that? I don't feel happy about it. I think we achieved what we wanted to achieve in terms of proving that technically we can change the trend. But I also believe that the next thing that has to happen is that we don't see this as government policies. And I am worried that in the last 6 months, the military and the police, who were highly committed not only on law enforcing, but also participating on conservation, they're losing the enthusiasm and the and the timing that they were devoting to this. So I hope that the trend continues. There's going to be an Amazonic summit in the months to come. And I have to say this clearly. People don't know the size of the Amazonic biome. The Amazon biome can be as big as 80% of the United States of America. It has a very low density of law and order capacities. And you can monitor with satellite technologies, but it takes minutes to cut down trees in certain areas. So I think what we have to do rapidly is to create the market-driven, nature-based solutions and create a world fund, also with the contribution of our governments, so that we pay for the environmental service of conserving the Amazon. And one final thing that I have to say about this, the other thing that I really feel proud is that in order to conserve, you have to declare protected areas. When I assumed office, we had 14% of the Colombian territory declared protected area. We committed to be 30% by 2030. And with Minister Correa, we said we have to reduce our goal in terms of timing, and we were able to leave Colombia with 34% of the territory declared protected area in 2022. So I think that also is a major contribution for us.
Definitely. That's a wonderful achievement. Many people think that what drives deforestation is the coca plantations in Colombia. But studies have shown that the main driver of deforestation in the past 40 years has been precisely the cattle industry. How did you address this issue?
Well, let me say something about the deforestation overall. If negative land use and deforestation were a country, it would be the world's second largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And today is the second major source of emissions. And this is happening primarily in the global south.
Yes.
So this is not exclusive of the Amazon, it's happening also in some parts of Africa and some parts of South Asia. So we need to see this as a world effort. We committed in our climate action bill in Colombia to be zero deforestation by 2030. And you mentioned about the cattle industry. I wouldn't use the word industry because that expansion of deforestation is not happening by formal people involved in cattle production. What we said in Colombia at a certain point is we work with the industry for them to reduce the extensive land they use. And we said, let's try to reduce the area. Let's try to use rotation as a mechanism of productivity. But we also got them involved into something that I was questioned, saying I was too ambitious, but I said, we want to get a minimum to 100,000 hectares of silvopastures and demonstrating that this can be a way also to contain a lot of the emissions from that industry. And we got to 150,000 hectares, and the industry got involved, and they signed a zero deforestation agreement. Now, the informal, illegal cattle production is the one that is producing the highest damage in Brazil, in Colombia, in Peru, Ecuador, and part of Bolivia.
Yes.
And the only way that we can change that trend is to be able to create a payment for environmental services for those communities that sometimes are pushed by legal forces to get into that illegal cattle. That would guarantee a flow, a cash flow that would generate a living. But the other thing, if they conserve, they replant, they can also be eligible to participate in a compensation through carbon credits or through biodiversity credits with a much better accounting, because when you have deforestation and you're able to recover the land that you have lost, that is as clear accounting as clear can be.
Wonderful, wonderful. You have a very, very unique experience being the president of a country. Could you tell us, what do you think worked, what didn't work, what could you have done different today when you look back?
I rarely think about things that we could have done much better, but today, honestly, Vanessa, I am devoting much more time about the future, and especially about what the Global South can do. And I think since this is also a debate about ideas, I think there are two major worries that I have that I think we can solve with two solutions. The first one has to do with the poorest countries in the world. We all have to take action in terms of climate change. For example, Colombia only represents 0.6% of the world emissions, but we are in the top 10 of the most affected countries by climate change. Well, let's talk about the Latin American Caribbean. That Caribbean zone is exposed to natural disasters. Yes. But they don't have today the fiscal capacity to do all their climate action investment. So the one thing that I suggest is that with the G20, with the IMF, with the World Bank, with the IDB, we can be able to have debt swaps in which we condonate part of the debt vis-a-vis the climate action that poor countries have to put before a priority in their cabinet work. And the second thing is related to middle-income countries. We have countries like Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Peru, and we have to face the fact that after the pandemic, the levels of deficit spiked, the level of debt has spiked, and today in a cabinet discussion, you're having the debate of what goes to education, what goes to health, what goes to housing, what goes to infrastructure, and then what goes to climate. And you don't want to have that kind of challenge when we are committed to reduce by at least 45% our emissions by 2030 and be carbon neutral by 2050. So I have proposed that with the IMF, for the next 7 years, there is a set of fiscal investments on climate that will be counted below the line of the fiscal deficit calculations by the IMF, and that can generate the most impressive release of resources dedicated to climate action. So if those two things are met, I think we will definitely have a better experience.
That's much needed, much needed. Experts warn that parts of the Amazon, specifically 20% of the Amazon, is dangerously approaching a tipping point where parts of the jungle could become a dry savanna and could not sustain life anymore. What keeps you optimistic?
Well, we have to understand how climate works. And I remember when we had the fire seasons in 2019, unfortunately, it became political. It became an absurd debate of the left and the right with the fires. Because we all have to tackle the fires when they happen, but they don't happen just because it's something that came out of an unprecedented situation. When you have fires in Australia, due to the way climate moves and temperature moves, that means that you're going to have the fires later on in the Amazon, in the south, because the dry seasons move through to climate conditions from one hemisphere to the other. And when people say, why are you not doing anything about the fires? When you look at the Amazonic bioma, as I said, it's like 80% of the United States. And so you have a fire in Florida, you have a fire in Boston, you have a fire in Wyoming, you have one in Nebraska, one in New Mexico, and the capacity, the institutional capacity to mobilize the force or the firefighters to put an end to those fires, it's basically none. Because once you get to the point, you don't have a place to recharge your helicopters with fuel. You don't have the capacity to mobilize great amounts of water. So you have to do a lot of prevention, and that prevention becomes the most important priority, and that prevention starts with nature-based solutions. So we have to recover, we have to replant, we have to conserve, and to replant that forest takes 3 to 4 years, and you have the communities there who have to have a living that is sustainable for them by protecting. And that requires a major investment, and that's why What we're proposing nowadays with that climate nature-based solution or market-driven nature-based solution is that we pay to conserve and to protect. And why this involves the whole world is because without the Amazon, there's not going to be any target met by 2030 nor by 2050. Protecting the Amazon is not just a Latin American priority, it's a world priority, and we have to make available the massive mobilization of capital that this requires.
President Iván Duque, what a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and thank you all, and thank you for this amazing event.
Thank you.
Following the Vice President's appearance, please remain in your seats for the final talk.
Take a little time, think what you leave behind. It has to come from us to do what's right. We're running out of time. Please change your state of mind. Let's make a difference. It's only a matter of time. Don't change the colors of this world and this roller coaster of life. Why do you want to take the beautiful blue from the sky? With every root that is torn, we'll lose a chance to be reborn. There's only one ticket on this roller coaster we call life. So watch the seasons change, with blessings from the rain. Let's keep our hope. I still have faith in life. So let's give it back to the world before it's too late. Let us keep the earth green. We still have our chance. We still have time. Don't watch the seasons change if we don't change our ways. Let's keep our hope. I still have faith in life. We still have time. Take a little time, think what you leave behind. It has to come from us to do what's right. We're running out of time. Please change your state of mind. Let's make a difference. It's only a matter of time. There's only one ticket on this coaster of life. So let's leave our children with hope and smile.
Please welcome producer, director, and songwriter, Emilio Estefan.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, what you saw, they called me and they told me to get involved with this. I wrote this music and I produced this music because I think we still have time. And the main thing is a message that I want to deliver global and internet. Thank you for taking the time to spend and be aware what is happening in the world. What I'm going to do today is a little bit weird. I'm going to introduce your wife. It's weird. We see each other at home. I don't know if I say this is big Gloria Stefan, I to say Gloria, I don't know. I hope it's right. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it to everybody that is here supporting this incredible message about global. So, ladies and gentlemen, Gloria Stefan.
Is this on? Yes, there it is. Welcome to all the VIPs in our audience. I know each and every one of you is an important part of this, and very especially I want to welcome our illustrious Mayor of Miami-Dade County, Daniela Levin Cava, and our wonderful Mayor of Miami Beach, Dan Gelber. Where is he? Welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, and it is now my honor to introduce someone who has committed her life to public service. She's an inspiration to many and a barrier breaker. She has worked on climate and environmental issues her entire career, including by starting one of the first environmental justice units in the country as District Attorney of San Francisco in 2005. She is the first of many things, including the first female vice president. Yes! And the first Black and South Asian vice president. Please welcome Vice President Kamala Harris. Thank you so much for being here. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's great to have you here in Miami Beach, very especially on International Women's Day. Can it get any better? You are a history-making vice president.
You too, sister.
Well, I'm only the VP at my house, but well, that's good enough. But you and I have had the privilege of traveling the globe. Doing different things, I might add, but I've been able to experience firsthand with my connection with people all over the world, the connectivity that we do have as human beings and for our planet. And absolutely, we need to tackle this issue together because it is a world event. I love that this is an important conference focusing on solutions for climate change and not just the problem itself. I know that you and President Biden signed into law the largest investment in history to tackle climate crisis, and it is, that deserves applause. Absolutely, we need an administration focused on the things that need to be fixed. I'm a grandmother of a 10-year-old grandson, and I am particularly worried, and I feel that we absolutely need to do something to stem the tide. Pun absolutely intended here in Florida.
We can't just drip, drip, drip on this.
Absolutely.
No.
So how are you thinking about this moment?
So like you, and I want to thank everyone here in the Aspen Institute, I think we all understand that we have to be solutions-driven, and the solutions are at hand. I am therefore very optimistic and frankly a bit excited about where we are right now. As you mentioned, Gloria, and it's wonderful to be on stage with you. And thank you for your leadership in using your voice in so many ways on so many issues. We have, by my rough math, with the infrastructure law, with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the CHIPS Act, we are looking thus far in the 2 years of our administration at about $1 trillion that's going to hit the streets of America on the issue of climate. $1 trillion. And so we need to make up for some time lost, no doubt. But when we think about this, this is not incremental. This is going to have, I think, an exponential impact on where we need to go around a number of issues that are about climate adaptation and resilience. But also, I think of it in the context of what we are doing that is about job creation, manufacturing, what we are doing that is going to be about US-based manufacturing in a way that we will develop the skills and the workforce and also be intentional about driving diversity within the workforce in a way that it's going to have a substantial impact on a new economy, which is a clean energy economy. This is so exciting. I think of it in the context of what the resources we are putting into it right now will mean not only to the people of the United States, but around the globe, to your point. I was just in Munich a couple weeks ago at the Munich Security Conference, and after speaking about Ukraine and some other issues, I spoke about this issue. What we are doing here, and I want to give all thanks to the activists and the leaders who've been in this space doing this work for years and years. Because, we talk about the inside-outside game, right? It often takes that push from the folks who are outside to get, the bureaucracy of government to actually move. And we're seeing it happen. And so the global impact then, even when we talked about it in Europe, is that these investments will have a number of global impacts. One, when we think about investing in a clean energy economy and what we are doing, what we will do to therefore increase supply, right? And what that will mean to bring down global prices. We increase supply, it's going to bring down prices. But the other is the investment in technology and innovation to do the work that is about clean energy, about adaptation and resilience, will mean coupling with not only the government resources, but the private resources that will be spurred because of this. Investment in innovation and the creativity, the natural creativity around this, that will be models that will be used around the globe. So the impact is profound in terms of the number of people who will benefit. And then, of course, there is the point that is about the bringing down costs, but also clean air and clean water. And what this means in terms of something that is so precious in terms of the resources that we must protect.
Absolutely. And for me particularly, when we think about clean air and electric vehicles, I'm also concerned about what are we going to do with those batteries and the things that drive the electric vehicles. And I understand that there's new technology also involved with that.
That's right. And I'll tell you, I'm one of my themes is probably going to be, I'm just very excited. So I am excited about electric vehicles, and in particular, electric school buses. So I've been visiting US manufacturers of electric school buses. Okay, everyone here knows this is so totally preaching to the choir. It's estimated that 25 million children in our country a day go to school on the school bus. And over 90% of the school buses that are currently on the road are diesel fueled, which means that our children are breathing that toxic air. It is then having an impact on public health issues like asthma. What is that going to mean? It will then have a public education impact because they are going to miss days of school and what that means in terms of missing critical phases of their education. It's a workplace safety issue because the school bus driver is also breathing that. And what we are doing right now around investing in US-based manufacturing around electric school buses and the work that is happening that is also about holding up and lifting up our folks like IBEW and our union apprentice programs and what they are doing to build the skills that are necessary to do the jobs that are good paying jobs where there are going to be workplace safety and pensions and all of the things that recognize the dignity of work. All of this is part of the ecosystem when we think about an issue like electric vehicles. And so the Venn diagram of it all includes public health, public education. We're creating jobs. It's an environmental justice issue because as we know these days, mostly the kids who go to school on the school bus are in low-income communities. And all of these issues then will benefit from an approach that is about clean energy and being smart around a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions.
That speaks to me.
Yeah.
Yes. Both my kids had asthma, so I totally understand exactly what you're talking about. And I came to Miami when I was about 18 months old as part of the Cuban diaspora. And my Asturian grandfather would take me to the beach every day. So I have been enjoying the wonderful things that Florida has to offer for many, many years. In fact, he relaxed so much one day that he fell asleep floating on his back, and I had to get the lifeguard to go get the kayak and bring him back. But I remember standing and looking on Ocean Drive and enjoying the breeze and the sun. And, you know, even at a young age, I understood how important it is to keep the planet healthy. Now, after living in Miami Beach for 38 years, we see the changes.
Yeah.
Our bays, coral is dying.
Yeah.
We have major fish kills. And being on the water, I have seen the water rising to an alarming degree.
Yeah.
So saving our oceans is a big deal for me. I know that you are focused on this work. So how did you first get engaged in that?
Well, probably since birth. I was born in Oakland, California, which is in the Bay Area of California, and yeah, and you know, the Bay Area it credits itself as being one of the birthplaces of this movement. I grew up in elementary school. It was then, I'm going to date myself, but it was ecology classes that we would have. And in the Bay Area, there was this whole movement around Save the Bay, and the activism was strong. And then couple that with the fact that my parents met when they were active in the civil rights movement, which of course was a fight for justice and equality. And those influences really, I think, formed how I have thought of and worked on this issue, which is to take seriously the need to protect and preserve this beautiful earth, but also that let's always think of it through the lens also of equity and justice. So as you mentioned, when I was DA of San Francisco, I created one of the first environmental justice units because at the time, there's a community in San Francisco called Bayview Hunters Point that had an annual household income, which I think is still true, of about $15,000, 1.5. And not surprisingly, that community was just, you know, treated by some like a dumping ground. And you would see high rates of asthma, and you'd see the public health impact. And you know, in this movement, I think it's important for us, sometimes we might debate it, but I think it's important for us to also agree that there has to be consequence for bad behaviors. And so I created this environmental justice unit as a way of making sure that we were enforcing the laws that would protect communities that in particular were vulnerable, often because they were low income and didn't have access to the power that would otherwise be able to put a stop to that. When I was Attorney General of California, similarly, running the California Department of Justice, second largest Department of Justice in the country, only to the US Department of Justice, I took on this issue. You know, some of you may remember the Santa Barbara oil spills and what we needed to do in terms of litigation there. And so I have thought of it in many ways that includes the enforcement piece, includes the justice piece, but also as a kid maybe from the Bay Area, thinking about it with, again, excitement around the innovation and the potential that we have to actually invest in these brilliant, smart approaches, a lot led by, you know, the young leaders who are here, who I just met with earlier, to think about, you know, what we can do to get in front of this in a way that we also see the potential for new approaches, new professions, new leaders. Very excited about that.
Absolutely, and I know we have people from outside of Florida at this conference. How many here are from our beautiful state of Florida? Okay, so I don't have to tell you how important water is to us. We're dangling by a thread to the United States. We're practically an island here.
Yeah.
And
indeed.
Yes, very much. And we all care very much about the beauty of the life that the oceans afford us, both on the water, in the water, the importance of, as we mentioned, our bay. And we are a big part. We are very connected to the Bahamas. We butt up against their international waters. And it really is a responsibility for all coastal areas to take action, because the majority of the fish that people eat are literally on the coastal areas of the entire world. So we hold a very deep responsibility. You can tell that I'm very passionate about water. I'm a captain. I have 3 courses in navigation,
I didn't know that.
seamanship, and piloting. Yes. And I am very, very careful when I am out there on the water with the marine animals, with the manatees and everything, because we've seen a lot of sharks dying, whales that have been beached here. So that is crucial to me. I heard you love water policy.
I do,
right?
actually. I do.
Tell us about that.
I mean, even just the origin stories. Growing up in the Bay Area, we had one of the, back in the 70s, huge, extreme drought, and just learning from an early age the precious nature of it all. Water policy. First of all, we've got to diversify water policy and put the resources into it, right? So it's about conservation and recycling and what we need to do around water storage, and in particular underground water storage. Desalination, let's try and get that right and think about what we need to do there. Water policy, understanding that through the work that we will do, it is about, again, creating jobs, creating infrastructure. Let's think in a different way, water policy. Traditionally, we see floods, and then we treat that issue in a reactive way as the emergency issue it is when it happens, but the policy's not been so smart, because in coastal communities, the way to deal with the emergency, flush it into the ocean. And so let's think about ahead of time, okay, if we're going to deal with these whiplash effects that we're seeing in California, where we're seeing, on the one hand, a drought, and then months later, maybe even weeks later, right, flooding, how are we going to have smart policy around not only behaviors, but infrastructure and building, and just municipal policies that adapt to the realities of these issues? I also think of it in the context of what I think most people here for sure would agree. Access to clean drinking water should be a right, not a privilege of those who can afford it. Right?
Absolutely.
And so let's also start with that value statement and then figure out, okay, so are we actually playing that out? And I think about that in the context of lead pipes. We've been doing a lot of work around lead pipes, and our infrastructure resources are going into getting rid of, our estimate is within the next 9 years, we will get rid of all lead service lines in the country, lead pipes. So the grandmothers and grandfathers of those communities, predominantly now low-income communities, have been talking for years about the fact that, we may not be a scientist or a medical doctor, but don't tell me that this issue is not affecting the health of my child, because it is. They've been pointing to the fact that drinking that toxic water is having an impact on the child's ability to learn. I have met with the families, I've met with children who have actually had those experiences. And so the work that we need to do to also address something like that. Think about it from the perspective of justice, which is this, and equity. Well, lead pipes were not built only in low-income communities and communities of color. However, knowing then that it is producing toxic water, those who have the means, in communities, for example, with high rates of home ownership, can take some equity out of their home and get rid of those pipes and install new pipes. But not in the communities where you have high rates of renters or low income who are barely making it from month to month, and then that not being dealt with. And so the importance of the policy that we have is to say this has to be a matter of public health, and in a democracy, we should agree that the government, therefore, should meet the needs, in particular in a public health crisis, and step in to take those pipes out, and that's what we're doing.
Absolutely, yes. And I want to get to those important policies and legislation that you've gone through, but these things work. We're seeing, when you take steps, it works. I know that our wonderful city of Miami Beach has been raising streets and building pipes to get rid of the flooded waters, and we are seeing a lot less flooding.
Right.
And one of the things I'm most excited about is there's over $1 billion that has been designated for the Everglades.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
the Everglades, hello, this,
Yeah.
it's so important. I mean, even, I know that our street, 8th Street that runs across the entire state, originally they didn't know what would happen when they put that street through, and it caused the death of many plants and animals. They are now raising this, and already we are seeing those plants and animals coming back. And the Everglades is so important. It's the largest wilderness, tropical wilderness in the United States, the largest wilderness of any kind east of the Mississippi. It's a fragile ecosystem that cleans the water, the fresh water in Florida. So we'd love to know, what are some of the new climate investments that excite you the most?
Well, the water, what we're doing with water is definitely one of them, including, to your point, the $1 million that will go into addressing the Everglades, which, as I'm told and have read, produces about water for about 8 million people here in this area of South Florida. It was interesting. I was having a conversation with someone earlier about the Everglades, and the way that they described it to me is that the Everglades are almost drowning because of the seawater, the rising sea level. And just the visual image of what that means, to your point, in terms of the ecosystem that is there, in terms of plants and life. So that is the work we're doing, the electric vehicle work. The work that we are doing, for example, rebates. So and again, it's about bringing down costs. So electric vehicle rebates. So I think I have these numbers right, but it's about $7,000 for new electric vehicles, about $4,000 for used electric vehicles, which is a new approach, which is to create rebates for vehicles that are used. We also have created rebates for families to install new HVAC systems. So thinking about also the ways that we uniquely as government have the ability to create incentives, financial incentives, because again, in the justice category of all of this, it should not be that only the people who, I think many people have the will to participate in what we must do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and be smart. But not everyone has the means, because there is so much about what can be significant or accelerated that requires resources. And so we have to think about this movement in a way that we are making it affordable for a working family that wants to participate, but otherwise has been unable. And that's part of the work that our administration is doing, which I think is very important.
It's very important. And in Florida, you know, we have a lot of very difficult challenges, both with the hurricanes, as we saw on our West Coast, that really had and offshore drilling. There's a lot of things that we can be doing to be very responsible as we head into this new era where we really need to take big steps. And, you know, I was born in Cuba, and I've traveled the globe extensively, as have you. You've traveled the globe extensively, and you're working all kinds of issues. But when you're meeting with world leaders, how are you ensuring that the U.S. is doing its part?
So there's work to be done there. I have, for example, been meeting with the Caribbean island nation leaders. There's the group is called CARICOM. It's the Organization of Caribbean Nations. And I've been very candid with them, which is that we have to admit that there are certain nations that are some of the biggest emitters, and there are certain nations that are paying the biggest price. And so I look at what's happening in the Caribbean, and they're island nations. So they're seeing the land erosion, they're seeing the sea levels rising. Let's be clear that they are also experiencing these extreme weather events, which have a direct impact on one of the main sources of their GDP, which is tourism. And so they're just compounded harm that they're experiencing, disproportionate to their role in the cause of it all. And so I've been convening them, and we've been meeting with them around what we have initiated. We had a summit with them recently, where we are, as the United States, going to facilitate technical assistance and facilitate private investment, US private investment, to assist them in growing their clean energy economy and building up their adaptation and resilience capacity. And I just think that's the right thing to do. I was in Thailand recently dealing with activists who are working on the Mekong River and the issues that are there. And I brought a group of activists together. I told the government this is what I was going to do, but I did it. And bringing these activists together to uplift their work, which is about fighting for sustainability and fighting against what are industrial practices that are really having a very profound adverse impact in that region. So that is the kind of work that we have been doing, but there is more to do. And I would say that the reality, I think, is that we have to understand the impact of what we have done and what we continue to do, and then have a conversation about what, therefore, is our role as the United States in addressing it in a way that can be helpful, because it is our neighborhood, in particular when we're talking about Western states. But, I also, for example, went to the Philippines and went to the Palawan Islands. I'm told I was the first vice president or, person at that level who had been there. And the Palawan Island is in the South China Sea. And there I visited with the local folks who are involved in trying to have investment around sustainable fisheries. And I think whatever we can do to help incentivize and support the kind of activism and work that's happening around the world will inure to our benefit, in that it will benefit the globe. So that's how I think about it.
Thank you so much. And it's daunting work, all of us that are here seeing this conference. When you look at the things that are happening all over, it's easy to get disheartened, but I happen to believe that we are all creating reality collectively together.
Yeah.
And whenever I need inspiration, I look to my family. From the moment that my kids were born, we did whatever we could. We'd go to the back of the house, clean up the things that washed up on the rocks behind the house. There's something that each of us can do in our own families to make things better. We can't focus on things and say, oh my God, it's too big, we can't fix it. We have to stay positive. And I know that I look to my family, my fans worldwide that have allowed me the pleasure of being able to make music for them. What is it that motivates you to do this kind of work?
I see that it makes a difference. I think, is that where the young leaders are, the fellows that I just met with? I thought that was you. I just met with, I hope everyone has had a chance to meet with them. I mean, they're brilliant. Look at just doing the dance in the chair. They're excited. They're thinking about, one of the young leaders was talking to me about climate mental health. I said, tell me what's going on with your peers. Climate mental health. And she talked, I said, I think I understand that, but unpack it for me. And she talked about how her peers are thinking about it. One example is, whether when they're ready, could they start a family? Yes. Worried about what that would mean. And the stress of it. They were talking about it in terms of their peers trying to figure out, they're going to have to get a job and they're going to have to make a living, but what can they do and how can they adapt the education that they're having now to their activism? To which I was sharing with them, when I go to speak at colleges, when I talk about this, I say, if you're, there's a bunch of students, and I'll say, if you're an HR major, well, we're creating a clean energy economy, and all kinds of new businesses are going to sprout up because of that. They're going to need an HR person. If you're a communications major, we're going to need you to understand everything that is at play and help us articulate this in a way that makes sense to the largest number of people and that is accessible. So that makes me so excited, because you're going to leapfrog over all of this. You are. And, you asked Gloria earlier about just the international and global piece. this is going to be the leadership that not only is dealing with the climate crisis, but we all understand connected to that is what we're seeing around the globe in terms of food insecurity, energy insecurity, and what that means. You know, I took heat when I was in the United States Senate, for a number of reasons, but when but there was a time when I was questioning someone who was up for a nomination for a position that is about national security. And I asked this person about the climate crisis as having a national security component. And you know what press just took me, oh, what is she doing, what is she doing? But here's the thing, when we think about this work, it ranges from issues like food insecurity, energy security, to national security, global security. Why? Because, basic fact, human beings need to eat food. If you cannot grow food where you live, you move somewhere else. And invariably, it is very possible that communities of people will move to places that speak a different language and pray to a different God, which will result in conflict. We are seeing, if you look at migration patterns around the world and overlay that with what we're seeing in terms of changing climate, more migration, I'm told, than we've seen historically. And there's a direct connection to all these issues. So the leadership that we have, I'm excited about it because it's going to address a lot of these issues that seem unconnected, disconnected, but are directly impacted by this work.
Madam Vice President, first let me congratulate and thank you for representing women in such a daunting position. Absolutely.
Thank you.
We know politicians catch heat, and thank God somebody wants to take it because I wouldn't want that job. But thank you, everyone that's here in this conference, for having the conversation, for starting the conversation, for taking steps, for passing legislation, for being focused on things that as a world we need to focus on together. And I'm very proud of Florida and Miami Beach and the Aspen Institute. And I thank you so much for being here with us. It's really an honor to have you, and it's an honor to be able to speak with you here
Thank
today.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen. Keep doing the work that needs to be done.
Please remain in your seats.
And now, Chris James, Kara Mangone, and Diana Olick.
Hello, and first of all, I just just want to thank the Aspen Institute for having us on behalf of the three of us, and I would like to thank them mostly for insisting that you all remain in your seats for this last panel, which it's not the main attraction, obviously, but we promised to make it fun. I'd like to introduce our guest, Kara Mangone, who is Global Head of Climate Strategy at Goldman Sachs, and she was also the CEO of the Sustainable Finance Group and Managing Director of Investor Relations. And of course, Christopher James, who is founder of and Chief Investment Officer of Engine One, which is a global investment firm. I am CNBC's climate correspondent, so I cover the intersection of business and climate. And I'll say a couple of years ago when I was covering COP26 in Glasgow, one of the investors there said, I know you're focused on all of the governments and the billions of dollars of investment that they're doing here, but really it's going to be the trillions coming from the private sector. And we already saw Paul D'Onofrio say that, and I'm looking at the money right here. So let's start with you, Kara. First of all, tell us about the strategies at Goldman Sachs for sustainability, not only in the energy space, but also in some of the smaller technologies that may have not yet gotten to scale.
Thanks, Diana, and it's great to be here. Thank you to the Aspen Institute. This has been a fabulous series of conversations, and excited to be part of this one. So, look, climate strategy at Goldman Sachs looks a little bit different than it may at a typical corporate, right? We're a financial institution, and so for us, we don't create products, right? We're a services business, and so our climate strategy really has three pieces to it. The first is the work that we do with our clients, right? This could be asset managers, it could be asset owners, it could be corporations. And that is really the most meaningful role that we will play in energy transition. The second is our operations. We've been carbon neutral since 2015 across our operations and business travel, but it's important that we walk the walk as well. And then the third piece, and this is something that Chris thinks about a lot, we think a lot about at Goldman Sachs, is we know that this is not going to be an easy transition. It's going to be complicated, it's going to be challenging. There's a lot of gaps that exist in the market today. And so the third bucket is, how do we think about closing those gaps? Who can we partner with? What are the things that really need to be unlocked? And so I think to your question, a lot of what this looks like at Goldman Sachs is like sort of the simple dollar and cents of what we do across each of these businesses, just with the flavor of how we can allocate capital, how we could provide advice, how we could provide financing to actually support the technologies that need to be developed, and acknowledging that this is going to take time, so also supporting a lot of the large corporates that are ultimately in these hard to abate sectors that are going to need to be deploying the capital and the expertise and the jobs and the people to transition these industries over time.
And we're going to get into the particulars of that, but Chris, I want to turn it to you. You founded this firm because you wanted to create positive change. You were quoted as saying that. What is the strategy at Engine One to get to that?
So we think there's a tremendous opportunity to drive investment returns by working on trying to solve the world's biggest problems. Simply. And we think that there is an alignment between the ability to solve these problems, attract capital, drive returns, and be able to build a ecosystem that by decarbonizing you also drive value. Now, it's a slightly different approach because in order to do that, it is a place where you have to get your hands dirty. And sometimes you have to break some things. And that, we think, is what is really needed in order to bend the curve. Simple example, we do not believe in divestment. We don't believe in giving up your vote. Giving up your vote has never been the right solution in order to actually drive change. Now, I think the idea and the frustration among everybody that we're not moving fast enough, absolutely there should be, it's in a protest. But we have to go to where the emissions are. We have to decarbonizing, and in doing so, I think you create value because what you end up building is you end up building a more durable, a more resilient company that also will have more duration because the world is clearly wants to decarbonize and is decarbonizing. And the way you're going to create value is to be around long enough. And so therefore you have to decarbonize. And that's kind of the general idea is to focus across the natural resource space and all the areas that are both emitting and are part of the solution in decarbonizing, like commodities, minerals, areas that people tend to think of as dirty, but are necessary in order to decarbonize.
And you got your hands very dirty taking on probably the biggest of the dirty guys, Exxon. Tell everybody what you did there.
Well, it just so happens that ExxonMobil is the 4th largest emitter of emissions. And when we were looking at building the firm, we felt that there was an opportunity with the largest emitters, with the leaders in each of the companies in each of the industries that were in the emitting sector, to try to drive change, and to drive change to how to build a broad coalition of people that could agree on one simple thing. And that one simple thing was, how do you create value over the long term? And in order to do that, you're not going to be in business if you're a heavy emitting company. In 2035, the world's going to change dramatically. Yet at the same time, you have companies, like a company like ExxonMobil, who has phenomenal engineering talent. And we said that the idea is, how do we look at this energy? And we call it a transformation instead of a transition, because a transition makes us think about a one-for-one replacement. It's not. Power demand is going to grow, and it's going to accelerate from here. So we have to realize that is a truth, and we have to find a way for these companies and this incredible engineering talent to play a role in this decarbonization. And so we felt that there was a path if we put the right people on the board. Exxon didn't have a single person with energy experience on the board, which is amazing. And certainly no one with successful energy transformation experience. And so someone like Kazuki Atala, who started Neste's biofuel business with a $25 million investment in 2007 and turned it into $1 billion business by 2019. Andy Karsner, who you guys all, I'm sure, have listened to Andy speak much more eloquently than I can, who was a undersecretary of the DOE of renewables and had a lot of experience on the renewable side. So putting people like that, we put up Anders Runevad, who is the Vestas CEO, as well as Greg Goff, who is a traditional oil and gas, but had an unbelievable belief system that we have to reduce impacts across all businesses. And so putting that on the board, and I think it's I started to see real change. I mean, it's not going to happen in a year.
But you changed the board. You got
but we,
in there.
we won three board seats, and yeah. And the idea, because we started talking to people, how do you actually run a real campaign? Because like a political campaign, you imagine starting with the people that you have to convince that there is value to be created in energy transition, already own Exxon. So you're starting with a group of people that clearly energy transition is not the highest ranking issue on their list. But we found a common sense argument that put together the big three, that put together active managers and retail, because at the end of the day, there is value to be created in this transition. It's the biggest transition in the world.
And the value is what I want to talk about, because you touched on it, that there was, there's money here. There is money to be made in climate, and that's not a terrible thing, because that's how you get investors involved.
We have to have private capital.
You have to drive the capital, right? So, Kara, when you're looking at investments that are made, you're looking at driving capital to your investors. How do you transparently tell them, show them that what Goldman is putting its money for is going to make money for your investors?
Right. Well, look, I think one thing that's really important is, Chris just mentioned, this is going to take a transformation. This is sort of like the next industrial revolution that we're going through, right? And it's not just about energy, it's actually about decarbonizing the economy. So when we think about what we need to do, decarbonizing a portfolio or decarbonizing a bank, that's very different than just decarbonizing the entire economy. The easiest way to decarbonize a single portfolio is just to divest. That's the easiest way the emissions go away. But guess what? The emissions don't actually leave the environment, they just go somewhere else. And so we've been really intentional in our strategy as a company to think about how do we walk and chew gum at the same time? How do we actually support companies, corporates who are making transformations across their business? How do we also be a really big investor in clean energy? So we've been investing in clean energy for the past 16 years. We've been at this a long time. We just launched last year a $1.6 billion private investment fund called Climate Horizon, so specifically focused on investing in technologies. You have to be able to do both. Last year was a record in terms of clean energy assets acquired by oil and gas companies, by the sector. And it doubled from the prior year. So like this is going to take time, but actually where you want Goldman Sachs to be involved in terms of allocation of capital is you want us to do both. You want us to invest in clean energy because it's important to get capital there. It's also really important that we can spend time with our clients and help to advise them on these acquisitions and help them think through what this transformation strategy looks like over time.
So how much leverage does that give you as an investor in, say, a so-called dirty company trying to turn it into a clean company? How much leverage do you have simply because you're putting money up there?
Well, look, I think for us, there's a few pieces to the business, right? So different from engine number one, right? We are not just an investor. We are a provider of capital. We provide advice. We help risk manage. And so the approach that we have is really across the ecosystem. It is spending time with our clients, being pragmatic and listening and knowing that it's going to take time to transition, but that looks a little bit different depending on the sector and depending on where technologies are. So if you look at, we have to be realistic that in this country, in the United States, right, 20% of our electricity last year came from renewables. The rest came from a fossil fuel mix effectively. And so there's a lot that we can do to help accelerate and deploy capital to help, help solve that. But part of the challenge there is not just capital deployment, it's intermittency, right? It's storage. And so a lot of those things are just going to take time. And so in terms of your question on accountability and sort of how do you engage, well, it's actually really important to be in a place where you are close to companies, where you can listen and you can understand and you can help develop pragmatic solutions. Just a great example, we advised Chevron last year on a very significant, a few $billion-dollar acquisition of Renewable Energy Group. So this is helping them get into the biofuels business, and this is a really important thing. That happens when you have that relationship with the client to be able to help and support them on their journey.
And Chris, engine number one has a climate ETF. Explain to everyone how that works, how you choose companies you invest in, and how you, again, like I asked her, provide that transparency to your investors in that ETF.
Yeah. If I may, let me back up just a little bit on this, because there are three strategies that all work together. We have a public fund, which is we call it strategic activism, that's focused on helping companies drive value by decarbonizing is the main way, but also to help define what good looks like for a particular industry. A private equity business that really focuses on heavy emitting assets and decarbonizing these emitting assets. All of these have transparency. The other portion of this is we have an ETF called Transform Climate, which is NETZ is the ticker, and then we have one Transform Supply Chain. All of these actually integrate well because what we're seeing, we have two big global trends, decarbonization and deglobalization. And the supply chain coming back to the US, the most simple way to decarbonize is our grid in the United States is half the carbon intensity of the grid in China. Heavy manufacturing back to the US, that is a win. What we like to do, what we publish quarterly is in any of these funds, what we'll do is we'll look at how much carbon do we have in the portfolio today. And the last time I looked, and this isn't a last week number, last time I looked at this within our hedge fund, for example, it was the portfolio emitted about 2.3 billion tons of carbon. That same portfolio in 2030 was going to emit slightly over 1 billion tons of carbon. And we think the value creation in owning assets and driving decarbonization is dramatically better than just buying a bunch of tech and healthcare stocks and saying I don't have any carbon in my portfolio. That just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And if there's one other point we have to touch on, we have to touch on permitting. There's absolutely zero chance that we're going to hit any of these targets unless we fix permitting across the entire
Explain
ecosystem.
Explain what that is exactly.
So right now in California, it takes 100 months to get an interconnection if you're a solar farm into California. The wind farm, the wind farm in Wyoming that's going to feed the California grid, the environmental impact study was 12 years. It's going to be 19 years before the thing gets done. That plant, that power line everyone's been fighting from Canada down to New York City, that's going to be 20 years to get done. There is zero chance that the emissions curve bends until we fix these issues. And these are incredibly important, and we have to get this done, because we can build a lot of solar farms, but we can't connect them in the grid, and we're not going to be able to do this. And so that there are several bottleneck issues that are also investment opportunities, but there are also issues that we can all really get loud about, because we have to fix these.
And that's obviously a policy issue. And with the weight of Goldman Sachs behind what you're doing, how much are you able to influence policy to make the changes to implement this kind of change?
Look, policy is very important. It's definitely one of the key unlocks. The Inflation Reduction Act is certainly, a monumental piece of legislation, right? In terms of, the thing that we think a lot about at the firm is commercial viability, right? Ultimately, and really lasting energy transition. So ultimately, if energy transition means really expensive, unreliable energy, that's not going to work, right? And so what we need is to be optimizing for clean, affordable, reliable energy. And so a lot of what you see in the Inflation Reduction Act is very helpful on that affordability point, because the goal is to bring down the cost curve of adoption. Now, to Chris's point, then there's an implementation execution point, which is also really important. And then I'll just add a layer outside of the US. If we look at, kind of momentum in sustainable finance, climate finance, globally, there's certainly a stagnation in terms of the capital that's being invested in emerging markets. And so there is this concept, I think, which is important to really recognize is, within our business, so within sort of what Chris can do for engine number one, within what we can do at Goldman Sachs, there's a lot that we can do commercially. I mean, we have a big sustainable finance target. We've already, achieved hundreds of billions of dollars towards that. So there's a lot of momentum that we're seeing. But in certain places, there's certainly, kind of roadblocks and things that need to be addressed. Emerging markets, as I mentioned, climate finance is one of these. And so what did we do when we realized this research? We started spending time with different partners and decided to launch an innovation facility, which is focused on leveraging catalytic capital. And we're doing it with the Asian Development Bank and Bloomberg Philanthropies, two organizations that have a lot of experience in that market, right? Asian Development Bank, that is their goal and their mission, is they spend time with, they have boots on the ground, they know how you get capital deployed in Indonesia and India and Vietnam. And we've just seeded our first 2 investments through that. And what that specifically will do, just to be really clear, is, getting to commercial scale or commercial viability in wind in the US is different than in Vietnam, for example. And so it's basically putting the capital in a blended finance vehicle to be able to create a proof point that this can be investable. And then once you do that, that's how you start to crowd in additional private sector capital. So I do think, yes, there are policy changes that need to happen, but there's also just a lot of gaps that we can exist when I think we kind of link arms with others who have respective complementary expertise.
And we only have a very short time left, although I could keep you here since we're the last one, but I won't, I promise, I promise.
Secret Service we have guarding the door.
Shots after, right? You talk a lot about the clean energy transition, but we are inevitably going to be using more energy, are we not? And that's the problem.
There is very little shared reality on what is actually taking place across what electrification really means. Because if you think about everyone reducing scope 1 and 2, what does that mean? That means electrifying everything. And so we have been, for the last 30 years or 40 years, as we've, not only did we ship out 7.7 million jobs overseas, we also shipped out all the power required for this heavy manufacturing. As this comes back, we're going to move into a time period for several decades as we re-industrialize the United States and bring these supply chains back, that power demand is going to start to grow. Power demand starts to go means we're chasing a car with renewables. Like it's going away and it's accelerating. So it's we have to get our head around this idea. And I think about it in terms of, we have 2 big issues we have to solve. One is on the sources side, we have to build a lot more energy, and in places where it can, it of course should all be renewable. In places where it can, it should be as clean as absolutely possible. That gets into some wonky terms like there should be zero methane, everyone should be an OGMP 2.0, all these other sort of things that we have to take place. We have to have clean energy, and then we have to build out this entire ecosystem for electrification. And that means a lot more copper, that means a lot more nickel for batteries, but we're in a situation right now which is very, very, we have to solve this problem. And that is, we have grassroots movements within the environmental community, which is completely understandable why it exists, because most companies have not been great stewards of the land, of this. But we have a 50 million ton a year structural copper deficit. We're going to be producing in 5 years on the current pace less copper in 5 years than we are today, and we have to double the size of the grid between now and 2035 in terms of length.
So on that optimistic note, we're going to leave it there, Chris. Pam, thank you so much, Kara.
Okay.
That concludes our program in the Performance Hall. Please make sure to use the hashtag Aspen Ideas Climate as you post on your social media.